Alright, so this is the DBG, Book 5, Chapter 36, and the Romans, having been tricked out of leaving their camp under the guidance of Sabinus and Cotta, who did not want to go, the Romans are in a lot of trouble, having been ambushed and now surrounded. So, we just had in the previous chapter the death of some very important centurions and the injuries to others, and now it is the reaction of Quintus Titurius, whom we know as Sabinus. So, Sabinus, having been moved, perfect passive participle, by these things in the ablative, when, the reason when is because conspexisset is a perfect infinitive with an ending making a pluperfect subjunctive. So, when, since, or although, since we have a subjunctive, I do not see a tamen, so when or since. So when he had spotted, H-A-D, ambiorix, far off in the distance, procul, the one ambiorix, hortantem. Now this of course comes from the deponent verb, hortor, hortari, and of course, hortatus sum, which of course means to encourage. So when he had spotted ambiorix, encouraging his own guys, he sends metameteremisi misus, his own messenger, Gnaeus Pompeius, to him. The eo is referring to ambiorix. Rogatum is the example of the supine ending with um. Supines are fourth principal part looking things that are defective. They either end with um, that doesn't work. They either end with um or a long u. They translate to verb, but the one shows purpose with a verb or some action involving motion, and this one is an ablative of specification, like mirabile dictu, amazing to say. So here it is, the supine. He sends Gnaeus Pompeius to ask. And the rogatum then is introducing a indirect command with our subjunctive from the, of course, third conjugation, parcum parcere, we fear a giant liar. That he, implied ambiorix, spare, and parco parcere, it takes a dative object, himself, meaning Sabinus, and the soldiers. That guy, referring to ambiorix, having been called upon, appello appellare, responded. That, this is introducing following indirect statements. If he should want, wellet is, of course, from wallo welle, but it is the subjunctive, willim, wellis, and wellit, and of course the plural would be wellimus, wellitus, wellint, int. And remember, present subjunctives in if clauses, we call those protases, translate should, and then if there were an appositacy, translate would. So if he should want to talk, loquor, loqui, locutusum, with him, a deponent verb, he responded that it was permitted. Responded starts in the past, same time as responded. Was permitted, same time because it's a present infinitive. He responded that, he hoped that, so this is the infinitive of an indirect statement that introduces its own indirect statement. So it's an indirect statement introducing an indirect statement. He responded that he hoped that it was able to be obtained from the multitude. So ambiorix is claiming that he's going to talk it over with the men, because it pertains, subjunctive, to the safety ad salutem of the genitive plural soldiers. So he's basically saying, since it's their neck on the line, he's got to talk to them about any conditions of surrender. He responded that, so we're staying in indirect statement, the accusative subject, nothing, would be harmed. Remember that responded starts in the past. This is the unicorn future passive infinitive. So it's going to happen after. Future infinitives after. Here, here, here. Use the word would. Would be harmed. Nothing would be harmed to him himself. And this is, of course, in your dative case, ipse, ipsa, ipsum, ipsius, 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 ipsi, ipsi, ipsi for the dative, noceo, nocere, like parco, parcere, takes a dative object. And, que, so that nothing would be harmed to himself truly, in this parley, in this conversation, and he responded that he himself did put his own faith, his own guarantee into this thing. Remember that is id, when it modifies something, is the equivalency of hikakul or lud. That guy, now referring to, of course, Sabinus, he communicates with kata. Kata should have a long mark, and kata, a first declension masculine modified by salkio. Salkius, remember, means to wounded. Wounded. With the wounded kata, remember he took a rock to the face, that if it should seem, again, present subjunctive, we fear a giant liar, with the C clause, translated should. If it should seem like a good idea that they go out from the fight, that they exceed from the fight, and that they talk another subjunctive, loquor loqui, a third conjugation. Remember that short E-R-E is going to be expressed passively as a long I, and this is deponent, and that they talk together with ambiorix. Nevertheless, he communicates that, and so what we see is the communicant introducing, again, indirect statement. And this is truly insulting, in that Sabinus is using the words and the phrases of Ambiorix himself. It's almost as though Sabinus is becoming like a puppet to Ambiorix, that he hoped that it was able to be obtained from him, Ambiorix, concerning his own safety. Salute is salus, salutis, health or safety, and concerning the safety of the genitive plural soldiers. Kata denies, nego negare, that he, and to forget you're an infinitive for this accusative subject, is then adding an essay to iturum from eo ire, that he will go to an enemy having been armed. He's like, I'm not going to walk up to a guy when he's got weapons. And he perseveres. He remains resolute in it, as in this decision not to go. And so now we find out in the next chapter what old idiot Sabinus decides to do without kata. So Sabinus, he orders, and he orders the guys whom, and those guys are the tribunes. So he orders the tribunes whom, and it's the tribunes of the soldiers. These are kind of like lieutenants in the army. So he orders which tribunes of the soldiers he held around him in his presence. So in other words, the guys that were immediately at hand. So again, Sabinus orders which tribunes of the soldiers he had in his presence around him, and he orders the centurions of the first ranks. Remember, these would be the ones who obviously are the highest ranking, maybe those that have been before primus pili. So he orders those centurions and which tribunes he held around him. He ordered them to follow. Sequor, sequi, deponent verb, him. So it's bad enough that Sabinus is going to approach Ambiorix in the midst of this fighting for a parley, but he gets all of the top commanders, his subordinates, to go with him. And when, because that is not ablative, and I do have a subjunctive. Thus, I also then look for the time in. I don't see it, and so it's when or since, and not although. And when he had approached, Cato, Cedere, Kessi, Kessus, had, pluperfect, Ambiorix more closely, having been ordered to throw down his weapons. This is, of course, he, Sabinus. So when he had approached Ambiorix, having been ordered to throw down his weapons, he does the order, the imperatum, the thing having been ordered, impero, imperare. He does that order, and he imperats, the verb from which the perfect passive participle substantized, turned into a noun, and order is a thing having been ordered. The verb he orders, and the verb impero, imperare, takes a dative object, because you give orders to something in the dative case. And he orders his own guys, remember those tribunes of the soldiers and the centurions, he orders them, and then this is your indirect command, that they do the same thing. It's an id with a dim on the end of it. The same. So, he is told by Ambiorix, throw down your weapons. He does. And then he tells his guys, throw down your weapons. Meanwhile, while they drive between themselves. Here it's more like deal. Wheel and deal. So while they deal between themselves concerning the conditions, in other words, the conditions of surrender, the terms, if you would like, and a longer speech, again, if it ends with a long O, and you can put an N on the end of that word, and it turns into an English word, it's nominative, because sermo and the genitive would be sermonis. It's obviously where we get the word sermon. Sermon is a speech. And a longer speech is begun, is brought on, is instituted by Ambiorix in the consultation, in the wheeling and dealing and the consulting, paulatim, little by little. And so paulum would be a little bit. Paulatim is adverbial, little by little. Having been come around, having been surrounded, he is killed. Sabinus, that idiot, is killed because as he is talking to Ambiorix, and Ambiorix is dragging it out, he doesn't notice that the soldiers of Ambiorix are creeping up on him, and eventually they get so close to where, obviously, there's nowhere for Sabinus and his men to run around and escape, and so therefore he is killed. Interficio interficere. Then, truly, by their own custom, more, remember, comes from mos in the nominative, moris, it is the word custom, it is where we get the word mores. Mores are the customs of a culture. They shout victory! In other words, they've got the head of the Roman army. And they raise, tolere, sustili sublatus, a ululation. Ulula, ululare is a howl. It's a scream. They raise a ululation and they disturb our ranks with an attack. Impetus is an attack, with an attack having been made. And so therefore, having killed the top guy, Sabinus, it is going to be a real buoy to the spirit and to the confidence of the others. There's more. Nevertheless, so then we find out what happens, obviously, after Sabinus' death, which is really the beginning of the true end. So there, Lucius Cotta fighting is killed. And so now the dominoes begin to fall as Caesar describes it. Sabinus first, because he was an idiot and went to Ambiorix without his weapons. But in the general fighting now, Cotta is killed, interficio, with the greatest part of the soldiers. And so this is a sad scene. If it were a movie, it would be obviously slow motion. You'd be playing sad music in the background, like Adagio for Strings by Samuel Barber. And seeing just the disaster come to its culmination. The remaining guys receive themselves into the camps. And so those that are surviving the massacre run back to the camp from where, so they receive themselves into the camps from where or whence they had gone out. Out of whom, so we're saying some of these guys who are escaping, the stragglers from the battle, Lucius Petrosidius, the eagle carrier, the guy who carries the standards, he, when, cum is not going with magnum multitudine as with, instead it is going with your imperfect subjunctive. Premo, premere, pressi, pressus. When he was pressed by a great multitude of the enemies, he threw, projected, he projected the eagle, the standard, inside the wall. Remember that inter means between, but intra means inside. And so he doesn't want to, even being pressed by the enemies, to let them get the spirit stick. He himself is killed, Okido Okidere, fighting in front of the camps most bravely. So he falls, but he doesn't let the enemies get the spirit stick. He throws it on the inside of the camp walls. Those guys, meaning the stragglers who make it back to the camps, they sustain They endure the fight, the appugnatio, weekly, sickly, aigrum, to the night. At night, noctu, all to one. We would say in English, every single one. So all to a single one, with safety, with help, having been despaired, they themselves kill themselves. So a mass suicide. They don't want to fall into the hands of the enemies. That would mean torture and eventual betrayal, perhaps, of Romans. And so they would much prefer that they take their own lives rather than have their lives be taken from them by the enemies, especially under torture. A few, pauci, we get the word English, paucity. So a few, having slipped, lapsi comes from your deponent verb, labor, labi, lapsus sum. So it is a perfect passive looking participle. Not having been verb, but having slipped out of the battle. By with because of from, in, on, at. So on uncertain routes or journeys, they arrive pervenient through the forests to Titus Labienus, the legate, into the winter camps. Remember that Labienus, when you look at the map on page, I think it's 111, he is the camp south of Sabinus and Cottus. And so these guys are able to escape, only a few, to his camp, into his winter camp. So a few, having slipped out of the battle on uncertain journeys, they don't know where they're going. They're trying to make their way through the woods to Titus Labienus, the legate, and they make him more certain. Remember, this is an idiom. To make more certain means to inform. So they inform him, they make him more certain about the things having been done, having been waged, gerere. So, an utter massacre and disaster for the Romans, and the only people who survive are the very few. Remember that initially some people made it into the camp from where they had come. There it is, from where they had gone out. But, obviously, the mass suicide, as they knew that they would not be able to survive. So rather than starve, rather than be captured and tortured, they kill themselves, and then a very few, having slipped out of the battle, make it to Labienus. So we find out what goes on at Labienus' camp, and we're going to be finding what goes on at Quintus Cicero's camp, who is the camp right north of Sabinus and Cottus' previous camp. Thanks.